Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. I'm Michelle Dunnick, Director of Events and Investor Relations at United Way of Southeast Louisiana. United Way of Southeast Louisiana, together with the Louisiana Hospitality Foundation and Energy Corporation, are proud to support Phase 2 of the Hospitality Cares Pandemic Relief Program, which provides legal support and counseling services in partnership with Southeast Louisiana Legal Services and Loyola Center for Counseling and Education. Thank you for joining us, and I will now turn it over to Staff Attorney Amanda at Southeast Louisiana Legal Services. Amanda?
Hi, everyone. How you doing? My name is Amanda Golub. I'm the Managing Attorney of the Housing Unit at Southeast Louisiana Legal Services. Just for those who aren't familiar with Southeast Louisiana Legal Services, we provide free civil legal aid in the Southeast region of Louisiana. So we have offices in New Orleans, in Houma, Covington, Hammond, Baton Rouge, and Marrero. And I'm the housing unit. So what we do in the housing unit is we do everything in our power to prevent eviction, to prevent homelessness, to resolve any issues between landlords and tenants. So we'll help with like utility lockouts, anyone that has some sort of subsidy like Section 8 or public housing, eviction defense, just anything to keep people in their homes. Also habitability, not only to keep them in their homes, but in their homes in safe conditions. But our office does a variety of other things, anything civil. We don't do any criminal stuff. So if you're looking for a divorce, child custody, if there's domestic violence issues, if it's a homeowner going through foreclosure, we have a taxpayer clinic, a consumer unit that will help with bankruptcies. So we do help with food stamps, Social Security. We kind of do everything we can to help people, get on their feet and stay on their feet. But I know today we're here to talk about, most importantly, the eviction moratorium that was recently extended until October 2nd. So I'm just going to give a brief rundown of how evictions generally work in Louisiana. And then I'll talk about the protections under the CDC eviction moratorium and how tenants will get that. So the way evictions generally work in Louisiana is they would start with the landlord giving a 5-day notice to vacate. It has to be a minimum of a 5-day notice to vacate under Louisiana law. The lease can state that it would be more. Some leases say they need a 10-day or a 30-day notice, but if the lease doesn't state that, it's a 5-day notice to vacate. It needs to be in writing. So the landlord will put in writing that they want the person out within 5 days and the reasons why they want the tenant out. Oh, and also if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We're going to try to answer them as they come up instead of waiting till the end so that we can, make sure to cover all the material. So landlords, one of the common misconceptions in Louisiana is that these notices need to come from the constable, they need to come from the court, they need to be official somehow, notarized, something like that. They don't, the law says they just need to be in writing, which means your landlord can write them on the back of a cocktail napkin and post it on your door. Also, they don't have to mail it, they don't have to serve it, it doesn't have to be certified. It just has to be what they call in Louisiana, which is tacked, which means taped on your door, put in your mailbox, and that's considered service. I will say your lease can waive the 5-day notice. So if your lease waives a 5-day notice, that means the landlord doesn't have to give this notice. Most landlords do anyway, even if their lease waives it, because it lets the tenant know that the landlord wants them out, and it lets them know the specific reasons why the landlord wants them out. So, hey, you haven't paid rent in 3 months, you have 5 days to vacate. Once that 5-day period is up, the landlord can't just come into the property and throw your stuff out or change the locks or do any, move anybody else in. They can't do any of that. Once that 5 days is up, what they would need to do is file in court for what we call a rule for possession, and then you get a court date, at which time the tenant and the landlord show up and the court makes a decision as to whether the tenant would stay or whether the tenant would leave the property. So a lot of people get that 5-day notice and they think I have to be out in 5 days, which is not true. So sometimes people move out during that time, and then they realize later, hey, I should have waited till I went to court and got a chance to tell the judge my side of the story. You can, if the tenant's already looking to move out anyway, they can, move out at that time because the landlord's essentially saying, I want this lease to be over. And once you get to court, which in Louisiana, most places it's a justice of the peace, like Jefferson Parish, Jefferson Parish, St. Bernard, in our area, St. Charles, are all justices of the peace. In Orleans Parish, it's a city court, first city court on the East Bank and second city court on the West Bank. And so usually if you're in city court, you're not going to get the court date. The landlord will file it. You're not going to get a court date for about a week and a half to 3 weeks because they're usually more popular, unfortunately, and kind of backed up. And the justices of the peace, they only have to give you 72-hour notice of your court date. So you could potentially, the landlord could file for a rule for possession on Monday, and you could potentially be in court Thursday afternoon or Friday. So the process moves pretty quickly. And we actually are, I think it moves the quickest in the entire country. So once you go to court and the judge makes a decision, if the judge decides the tenant should move out, then the tenant's given at least 24 hours to move out, sometimes more. And that's kind of the entire process. So you have a 5-day notice to vacate, then the landlord, if you're not out, files in court, you get a court date. And then if you lose in court, then they'll order you out. And if you're not out within the time that the court orders, then the landlord would have to get the constable to come out and they'll remove you and your belongings from the property. So that's the basic, kind of process of the evictions. Obviously, when the COVID crisis started last year, a lot of people lost work. They fell behind on rent. And so the Center for Disease Control came in and created an eviction moratorium. And that they created just for people that fell behind on rent. Specifically at the time, originally it was because of COVID related income loss. Since they've extended the moratorium a couple of times, they've kind of updated their form. So now it's just if you experienced a loss in income in your household. So, okay, so we have a question. Does the court seem to side either with the tenant or the landlord more often? It depends on the court, it depends on the judge, and it depends on the situation. Most commonly, we are seeing evictions for non-payment of rent. That's just the most common one, even before COVID, and even now, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, because the eviction moratorium is supposed to prevent evictions specifically for non-payment of rent. But what a lot of landlords are doing is they are bringing evictions for other things when it's really about non-payment of rent. So they're saying, hey, judge, I'm not worried about the 8 months of rent that's owed. I'm worried about the grass that didn't get cut or the cat that I see on the property that maybe I knew or didn't know about, but that the lease says they can't have. So they'll try to find other reasons to evict. And then the biggest thing that we're seeing, because most leases are a year long. I mean, I don't know who's a tenant and who's been a tenant, but most leases are a year long, and the COVID crisis has been going on over a year. So at this point, pretty much every lease has expired and they can just move forward for what's called owner wants possession, which means the lease term is up and the landlord's given proper notice under the lease. I'm not going to renew this lease for another term. And those are very difficult for us to fight. We tried to take that issue up to the Fourth Circuit, to the appeals court, to get them to agree that the eviction moratorium actually extends to owner wants possession, but they did not agree with that. So if the landlord just files for owner wants possession, they'll usually win those cases. What we do as advocates is we'll try to work with the landlord, and we'll talk a little bit more about the rental assistance. And I know United Way is going to talk about their program. But a lot of times, if it is, it's about money. The tenant's behind on rent, so they're like, hey, I'll just terminate the lease because it's a year lease and it's up at this point, or it's a month-to-month lease and I can just terminate it for the next month. But we know it's really about money. So what we'll try to do is find either resources like the ERAP, the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, stuff like United Ways, or we'll try to set up a repayment plan with the tenant. Or if we go to court, we try to get the judge to give more time, because it's up to the judge to give more than that 24 hours. That's just the minimum. The judge can give 2 weeks, 30 days if they want to. So sometimes it's just about going to the judge and, presenting the situation that the person's in and seeing if, we can get that additional time. And some landlords are, not all landlords are, I'm a tenant advocate, but not all landlords are bad. A lot of landlords have been very, very patient during this time. A lot of landlords have been working with tenants who are very behind on rent to get caught up. There are some bad apples out there, though. There's a lot of landlords that we were seeing that if the tenant was behind on rent, for example, they would refuse to make repairs. Tenant would say, hey, my toilet broke. And they'd say, well, when you pay your rent, I'll fix your toilet. So, we were dealing with a lot of things like that because, for those, we have to get involved and sometimes take legal action on that. But yeah, it really depends. I mean, having an attorney is helpful because a lot of times there's defenses in your lease that most tenants, and honestly, most landlords don't read the leases. A lot of landlords go on Google and they just Google Louisiana lease and they print out the first lease that they see, and they don't read everything. So some leases have additional, what we would call a cure clause. And cure clauses usually work, it's a default clause or a cure clause where it says if the tenant has violated a term of the lease, then they're given a notice, which is different than the notice to vacate. So they're given a notice of the default or the issue, and then they're given an opportunity to cure it. So let's say, the grass gets really high and the tenant's responsible for grass cutting. They would get a default notice that would say, you need to cure this within a week, within 10 days, within whatever that term says. And then if you don't do that, then we can move forward and evict. And a lot of tenants don't know that they have that clause. Occasionally we'll see a mediation clause, which would require the landlord and tenant to go to mediation before they could go to court. Sometimes the landlord thinks that the grass cutting is the tenant's responsibility and the lease clearly states it's not. So they can't move forward for eviction for that. So, and I know I'm speaking very generally, but, that's it really depends case to case. But for people that are behind on rent prior to COVID and prior to this eviction moratorium existing, if you were even a day late on rent, your landlord didn't have to accept any rent and could pretty much evict you. And it was very hard to defend because that's one of your obligations under the lease is to pay your rent. And then once it's late, the landlord doesn't have to accept it. They don't have to work with you and they can put you out pretty easily. So a couple months into the COVID crisis, the CDC declared that it was a public health crisis for people to get evicted because most commonly what we see is people get evicted, they either end up staying with friends and family in what we would call doubled up situations where there's, 8 people in a 2-bedroom unit, and that creates a risk of higher risk of COVID. You have people going to shelters, which creates a higher risk of contracting COVID, people on the streets or in other unsafe situations, and that, might increase their risk of contracting COVID and therefore is a public health crisis. So they created this eviction moratorium to protect people. I'm gonna try to see if I can share my screen. All right, hopefully everyone can see this. And I can circulate this around, or you can just Google it. If you just Google CDC declaration, then you'll be able to see that. Great, okay, you can see it. So this is the updated, they just updated this because it was a weird thing. So the original moratorium was set to expire at the end of last year. They extended it. I think this is the 4th extension, but it was actually supposed to expire, and it did expire July 31st. So there was 2 days, that following Monday and Tuesday, where eviction court was held and people were evicted for non-payment of rent. And then Tuesday evening, the CDC extended the moratorium through October 2nd. So then our office had to, go to all the courts and make sure that they actually didn't evict the people that were caught in that in between, because now they're covered again since the moratorium was extended. So we, were able to do that. But what this is it's just a form. I don't know how the CDC came up with it. I don't know, I don't understand how this whole process was created, but this is what we use. And it's just an eviction protection declaration. And it has very easy instructions. You fill this out, you sign it, and then you hand it to your landlord. We recommend that however you get it to your landlord, there's no specific way to do it. You can do it in person, you put it in their mailbox, you can email it, fax it, text it. Well, we recommend you do it in a way where you're able to document that you did it. Here it says keep a picture or a copy for your records. So a lot of people communicate with their landlord through text. Send a picture through text because that way you can show that they received it. Because at least at the beginning of the moratorium, landlords would still file for non-payment of rent. And then they would try to say, well, I never got the declaration. And they would try to use that as a defense. Also, if a tenant is at court, you can hand the landlord the declaration at court. So even if the landlord says they didn't get it, you could just hand them a new one. There's no specific time frame. That's why I was like, I don't know if they thought this through for everything, but it's just basically you fill out the declaration under penalty of perjury that you do qualify under this declaration for the eviction moratorium, and then you just hand it to the landlord or the agent or manager, whoever you deal with, for that company. It's pretty straightforward. Number one, do I qualify? You need to check at least one box in column A and at least one box in column B. So column A is I received a stimulus check, economic impact payment in 2020 or 2021, or I was not required to report any income to the IRS in 2020. So a lot of folks that get Social Security, for example, or maybe were out of work and didn't make enough money to file taxes, they would qualify for that. Or I'm receiving any of the following benefits, so SNAP, TAMP, Social Security, or disability. So if you receive any of those, check that box. Or if in 2020 or 2021, you earned or expect to earn less than $99,000 as an individual or less than $198,000 as a joint filer. So if that fits you check one of these boxes, or multiple. If you got your stimulus and you also get SNAP, you can check both boxes. You just need to check at least one. And most people qualify for this, column A, and then column B is I cannot pay my full rent or make a full housing payment because my household income has gone down substantially. I have been laid off of work, my work hours or wages have been cut, or I have extraordinary out-of-pocket medical expenses. So if you can check one or more of those things in each column, then you qualify. If you can't on each column, you don't qualify. So then you determine that you qualify. Then you go through, it's a declaration that you're going to sign under penalty of perjury. Your income level qualifies for the reasons explained above. You live in a U.S. county experiencing substantial or high rates of community transmission levels of COVID, which is in the entire state of Louisiana. I've done my best to make timely partial payments that are as close as possible to the full payment and to get government assistance in making my rent or housing payments. So that's something that landlords have challenged, because you don't just fill out this declaration and then you don't have to pay any rent and you don't get evicted. You have to make what we call your best efforts. And we do recommend that people pay something because that shows your best efforts. But, landlords can file in court for an eviction for non-payment of rent. And even if you gave the declaration, they have the right to what we call traverse, or to challenge it. So they can go through and say, oh, this person was getting unemployment. They were getting, $500 a week and they paid me nothing. And the person would need to show that they were making their best efforts. And if not, they could still get evicted. So we recommend, if you're working with people, you can kind of go through a budget, even if it's $20 a week or $50 a month, like something to offer, because it does look bad if you get to court and you're 10 months behind on rent and you haven't been able to give a single dollar. That it's hard to argue that that's your best efforts. For some people it is, though. A lot of people, especially if you had, medical issues, or if you contracted COVID, you were in the hospital, then that might be your best effort is nothing. But a lot of judges will question that. So, and then if you were evicted, you would have no other housing options available. So you'd probably be homeless, have to go to a shelter, or have to move in with others who live in close quarters, which is what the CDC has considered unsafe for, higher risk for COVID. And then you understand that after you sign this, unless you come to an agreement with your landlord, you're still responsible for rent, back rent, any fees, penalties, or interest under the lease, that you must still follow the conditions of your lease, and that unless you come to an agreement with your landlord, if you fail to make your required payments, you could be evicted when this temporary halt of evictions ends. And you can still be evicted for reasons other than not paying rent or not making a housing payment. So specifically, this just protects you from the non-payment of rent. Like I said, we see landlords bring in, they'll drive by your place and look for some, oh, you have a cracked window. Oh, I saw a cat in the window. I've had so many grass cutting cases in the last few weeks because I guess that's the easiest thing for like a landlord to see. But they will try to evict you for a million different things because they can't do it for the non-payment of rent, even though we all know that's the issue. So once the tenant checks all those boxes, they would sign it, and then they just give the signed paper to the individual or the company, and that's it. And that gets you the protection from eviction. So, like I said, landlords can challenge this. The biggest challenge we did see was with the best efforts. There's a few landlords that will like go through people's social media, for example, and see like one lady was doing like a fish plate fundraiser and she hadn't given any money, and the landlord brought the printout of the social media to court and said, look, she's doing a fish fry. I don't know where she's got the money to invest in this. And I don't know how much money she made from this, but she hasn't given us anything. So that went against her best efforts to make payments. The other thing to note, and they specifically say it at the end here, is that the rent is still due. It's just not due right now. So October 2nd is when this last moratorium is going to expire. We don't expect it to be extended again. It was only extended this time on because they weren't going to extend it again, which is why we had that 2-day gap where it wasn't extended. They had to extend it because the emergency rental assistance program, despite being called an emergency rental assistance program, I'm sure you've seen some articles about how slow it's been moving. It came with the last stimulus package that we got, had rental assistance. There's also mortgage assistance for, for landlords and for homeowners facing foreclosure. And that money has just been very slow to roll out, not just in Louisiana, just all over the country. So they did this 60-day moratorium to be like, hey, it's 60 days, it's going to be the last one. But hopefully in that time, we can get these payments to the landlords, and then we can prevent the eviction crisis that we're expecting and very scared of. But that money's still due. So when October 3rd hits, landlords can file eviction for non-payment of rent. They can sue. We're expecting a consumer debt crisis. They can sue for non-payment of rent for all the money that's owed, plus the late fees, plus any other interest or penalties. A lot of leases will say that if the landlord has to hire an attorney, the tenant would have to pay for the attorney. Evictions have court costs, small claims house court costs that would be passed on to the tenant. So it's just a very real situation that we're kind of trying to gear up for as best we can. The other thing we're seeing, and not to be a total bummer, but a lot of people, either their landlords bullied them to move out, or the unit got so bad because the landlord wouldn't make repairs, something like that, where the tenant did already move and they're having a hard time finding a new place. A lot of landlords, since they got kind of burned by tenants that didn't pay for a while, they're requiring. I saw someone needed they wanted a deposit that was triple the first month's rent plus first month's rent, so that's essentially 4 months of rent up top. A lot of landlords are doing credit checks. A lot of them will see if you had an eviction in the last year, even if it's COVID related. They're not taking that into account. They just won't rent to you. And there's not a lot of protections in Louisiana for like denials of admission into a complex or a house, because we're very big on this is the landlord's property and they can decide who stays there and all of that. So we are seeing a potential issue with homelessness for folks that are going to get evicted or have been evicted and have a hard time finding a place, or just don't have the money to move. Because COVID, they lost their job because of COVID, or they got COVID, or a family member got COVID, or whatever's going on in their life. So that's kind of another issue that's coming up that we're seeing. All right, what type of payment plans have you seen / negotiated? I feel like you'd be paying that back for years. Yeah, and it depends, because some people, it really depends. So, and right now Delta's really kind of changed everything, but we had about a year of a lot of people that weren't working, but they were getting the unemployment, and they were with the extra 600 at the time, and then the 300, and then the 400 each week, also with the stimulus money. So a lot of people were able to stay afloat, or were just behind like a couple of months, because some people were making their best efforts. It just wasn't the full amount. And then the vaccine came out, and kind of life started coming back, and tourism started coming back, which is like a lot of low-income folks in the New Orleans area especially like their jobs are reliant on tourism. They work in restaurants, they are tour guides, they, work at the Superdome or, for some of the festivals. So that was coming back. And so people were starting to get regular paychecks where they could say, I'm going to get $700 a week. I'm going to get $1,000 every 2 weeks. I can give you 400 of that, every 2 weeks or whatever. And then if a landlord could see that somebody had work and we could show them, hey, there's a steady paycheck, here's where the money is going to come from, a lot of times they would work with them. Because if you evict somebody, you're not going to get that money, and you evict them and then you have to try to sue them. In order to sue someone, you have to serve them, which means you have to know where they live. And even if you win a judgment, you have to collect it. And that's difficult to do if somebody isn't working. If somebody has Social Security as their only income, you can't garnish that. So a lot of times it's actually in the landlord's best interest to work with the tenant, or else they're not going to get anything. But now with Delta, things are kind of, I know like a lot of our clients' hours are being cut a lot. We're relying on different concerts and festivals and events that are now canceled. So, that might change how the negotiations work. But with the negotiations, it's, a lot of finessing and just kind of showing the landlord, here's where the money is and here's how you can get the money. And then also working with them, because for the emergency rental assistance program and for a lot of the rental assistance programs out there, which there's not a ton right now, but I'm hoping more come into play. But a lot of them require the tenant to still be in the unit, because what they're intended for is to prevent an eviction versus someone who already got evicted and then now owes a bunch of money. So we'll tell the landlord like, hey, you can potentially get this money, but the tenant still needs to be in the unit for that to happen. So a lot of times they'll, work with us on that. And we'll say, well, tenant can give you a couple $100 here and we'll help you fill out the forms and we'll help you, as much as we can to get you this money. But yeah, it doesn't always work. Some landlords are just, it's my property, I don't want them here anymore. I don't care about the money, they'll say. And I'm like, that's why you rent to people. So I don't understand that, but that's their perspective. But the emergency rental assistance program through the city, that's the one that came from the last stimulus package. They'll pay up to 12 months of back rent and then up to 3 months going forward. So that also is helpful if the landlords know not only are they going to get that back pay, but they're going to get up to 3 months going forward. They're willing to, give it a little time for that money to kick in, because that's usually a large amount of money. So that's also helpful in the negotiations. Like I said, the city, the city's doing the best they can. It's just hard because these rental assistance programs were thrown on. The state runs it for a lot of parishes. Parishes could either run it themselves or they could have the state run it. So Jefferson Parish and Orleans Parish run their own programs. And then the state runs it for most of the other parishes in this area. So St. Bernard goes through the state. And they were just given this money and given all these rules about how to distribute it and what paperwork is needed, but they weren't given money to hire more staff, for example. So I know the folks at the city of New Orleans have full-time jobs and are also doing this rental assistance program. So they are working as hard as they can. It's just going to be slow because, they don't have the capacity, which is why this extension is very helpful. But we are expecting when October 3rd hits, that there's going to be a lot of evictions filed. And if they're for non-payment of rent and we can't negotiate with the landlords, there's not going to be a whole lot we can do. So we'll just be asking for more time or trying to get some sort of assistance. There's a couple places that will help with rapid rehousing. For example, like Jefferson Parish has a rapid rehousing program where if you are evicted, they can help you with a deposit at a new place and up to 3 months of rent at a new place. So there's a few programs like that that'll help people get on their feet, because some people just need a few months to start working. Because even if you get a job, usually the first few weeks is like training and you're not doing full time. And then you'll start to get those paychecks, and you also don't get paid like the first day you work, you're not getting a paycheck. It's probably going to be 2 or 3 weeks before you get a paycheck. So, all right. The city's program sounds amazing. Are there any big hurdles in the application? Something tricky in the application? The city's application is actually, it's not terrible. What I'd say the tricky things are with their application is that the landlord has to fill out some stuff and the tenant has to fill out some stuff. They need a copy of their ID. of any income that they're getting, or proof of a loss of income. So if you have your unemployment, then that shows that you're receiving unemployment and you qualified. You need a copy of your lease. So there's just documents to collect. And it's not too bad, and it's not too overwhelming. But some landlords, because they have to give their ID, they have to fill out a W-9 and a landlord vendor form. So a lot of landlords don't want to give their personal ID. But I'm like, do you want to check for $10,000? You're going to need to do this. So, and then, if the landlord refuses, at least in the city of New Orleans, if the landlord refuses to take the assistance, which I know surprises people, but like I said, one guy told me, it's my property. I'm not going to accept anything from anybody but the tenants. That's how I do things. There's a lot of landlords that you'll see they operate on a cash only basis, for example, and they don't want to fill out these forms with the city because they have to fill out a W-9, they have to fill out a vendor form, so there might be some tax consequences that they don't want to deal with. So that's another reason why landlords won't take it. And some landlords just have such a bad relationship with the tenant that they just want them out no matter what. They don't care if money's offered. So in that case, if the landlord refuses the assistance, in Orleans Parish, at least, there's a way for the tenant to get that assistance directly. So the tenant can fill out the vendor form instead of the landlord, and they would be able to get a check. And we have seen some tenants get checks. And that should be used to pay your back balance because you still owe it. But the city will also sometimes pay a few months forward to help somebody, to access a new place. And the tenant doesn't have to use it for the back balance, but they still owe that back balance. So it's just something we have to keep in mind. But a lot of people would use it to, to move somewhere else and kind of start over. So yeah, so the city, yeah, they're doing their best to process the application. I think they got 7,000 applications when they opened the program. So the first 3 days, and there's, it's very, very backed up. And they're also working with us and the courts here. We have a help desk at First City Court on the East Bank and Second City Court on the West Bank, where basically any tenants that are facing eviction, there would be an attorney on site, and we could represent them. And the city is working with people who have evictions filed against them. We're trying to process those applications faster. But the other thing I'll say, the only other big hurdle, it's not in the application. It's in once the city has a completed application and they've approved it for payment, it has to go to their financial department to cut the check. And that process takes about 3 weeks. I hope that they can move it faster, especially with folks that do direct deposit. It should be faster, and they're trying to speed that part up. But a lot of landlords, you tell them, oh, you filled all this out, okay, it's going to be about 3 weeks for the check, and they're like, another 3 weeks, and that might be a hurdle for them. Yeah, so I'm trying to think if there's anything else to add. Those are the main points of it. Like I said, SLS, we do have a table at First City Court and Second City Court. We also help out at Judge Cusimano he's in the Elmwood, in the Joe Yenny building. He is a justice of the peace in Jefferson Parish, who has the largest amount of evictions out of any justice of the peace in Jefferson Parish. So he does court Tuesdays and Thursdays, and I'd say 90% of the time we have someone there. We're doing our best to be everywhere. And to help as many people as we can. So, yeah, if you have tenants that get a notice to vacate from their landlord, or if they have a court notice, then you can have them contact us. And I'll hopefully, Michelle, I can put my information in the chat, or you can put it there. But yeah, if they don't have a notice, if the landlord's just like verbally said, hey, I'm going to kick you out, then there's no legal issue yet at that point. But if they do get a notice or a court date, they want an attorney, that's the time they would need to talk to us. Yeah, so I'll put we have a housing hotline and I'll put it's an email and a phone number, and tenants can call that directly. Y'all can email us if you just have a general question. That's where that would be. And I think that covers everything. I'm happy to answer any questions that folks have, online or offline.
I'm here, Amanda. I'm just trying to figure out how I show myself again.
I can see you.
You can see me? Okay, here I am. Okay. So thank you so much, Amanda. That was so enlightening. I think that I was unaware that it got extended even. So that's, I think I was just under the July 31st, which is amazing that they did that. I did want to just briefly plug our rental and mortgage assistance program at United Way of Southeast Louisiana. It was launched with the grant that we received from Mackenzie Scott. And we have that application. I'll drop it in the chat box as well. It is unitedwayscla.org/rent mortgage. And our requirements are pretty simple. You have to be behind on your rent or mortgage with proof from the landlord or the mortgage company. You need to be a resident of our 7 parish service area, which is Jefferson, Orleans, Plaquemine, St. Bernard, St. Tammany, Tangipahoa, and Washington Parish. And your household income must be below $51,000. And you just have to have proof of job loss or job reduction due to COVID. You would just submit your application, which you can find on that website, by email, fax, or you can drop it off in person on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday from 9:30 to 1:30. Our offices on Canal Street are open. Our address is 2515 Canal Street. It's in Mid-City. And then they can take it from there. The average amount of the assistance program is 1 month rent or mortgage. So it really depends on what you have in your lease and in what you've agreed with your landlord. So I definitely recommend applying. The application again is pretty simple, and it can help relieve like one of your month's rent when you're waiting for your city grant to come in, which sounds amazing, but 3 weeks that's a long time. Yeah. So maybe I'm sure, I don't know what our lead time is, but I'm going to be honest, it's probably not 3 weeks. So you probably get it a little bit faster. So again, United Way SCLA/rent mortgage. And Amanda, do you have anything else? I don't have any more questions.
No, thanks so much for having me. And like I said, if anyone has any follow-up questions down the road, I'm more than happy to answer them. I put the information in the chat on how to reach us.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Amanda, for joining us. And we will be back next month, September 9th, for another Know Your Rights webinar about, I'm pulling it up. Ooh, where is it? About Know Your Rights on comparative state regulations for tipped workers. We're going to look at other states' regulations like California and New York and learn what might work for our hospitality industry here in Louisiana. So thanks again, Amanda, and thank you for joining us and viewing our webinar.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Bye.